Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Weekend Review for February 11, 2024. Today we're talking with Hrant Mikaelian. Hello, Hrant. Thanks for joining us today.
Ողջույն Hrant.
Hi, Aspet. Hi, Hovik. Glad to hear from you.
Thanks for joining us. Well, let's turn our attention to Yerevan politics. On Thursday, the Yerevan Avagani, the Council of Elders, this is the city council, met to discuss the canceling of mandates of several opposition council members. The opposition had planned to boycott the council meeting and prevent a quorum, but two members of the Public Voice Party joined the meeting and voted with Civil Contract and the Republic Party to overcome quorum and also give them the needed votes to oust Hrant Mikaelian, a former mayor of Yerevan and leader of the second largest party in the council, National Progress, as well as two other council members. Yet another two council members, including Zarui Postanjian, survived the vote. There's been a lot of acrimonious drama in the city council since the September 2023 elections, which were also resolved in a similar manner. Civil Contract and the Republic Party did not have the votes to appoint a mayor, and Public Voice Party, then led by Vardan Ghukasyan, showed up for the vote and gave them quorum. As appreciation for his efforts, Ghukasyan and his cronies were booted from Public Voice in what amounted to a coup within that party. Vardan Ghukasyan, by the way, is a controversial figure who came to fame through his scandal and obscenity-laden Facebook persona. He is believed to be outside Armenia and has the title of Honorable Leader of the party, essentially leading the members remotely. Incidentally, after the scandal with Public Voice, Ghukasyan started a new party called DOK, DOK, which is an acronym for Demokratia, Orenk and Garkabahutyun, Democracy, Law, and Discipline, and also it's his street nickname, Dog. One of the Public Voice Council people, Vardan Avagani, admitted that they were summoned to the investigative committee on Tuesday, but would not say what happened here. Hrant, what the hell is going on with the Yerevan Avagani?
Well, you're right that basically Hrant Mikaelian is now turning into a major opposition figure, which is interesting because the parliamentary opposition did not directly participate in Yerevan election, while one of the blocks, the Mother Armenian bloc, is connected to one of the parliamentary fractions. But anyway, it's not direct participation. And so we see that Hrant Mikaelian became the main opposition towards the authorities in Yerevan. And we see how authorities are trying to oppress him, not only because he collected the most of opposition votes, but also because he's viewed as a viable alternative on two dimensions. First, he has been a mayor, and let's say maybe he was not a very successful mayor, but in comparison with Tigran Avinian, he looked a bit better and he collected more votes. So he's perceived as a viable opposition, and also he is acceptable for many people who don't like neither current government nor the previous government. So he is kind of more acceptable for many people. So that's why they're oppressing him right now and his faction. While what we see on the so-called DOK party side is that they are clearly a spoiler for the government. So people who were supporting the party of Vardan Ghukasyan, they thought he is the most radical opposition, which turned out to be fake. It was just a rhetoric. So this is also noteworthy. Although, unfortunately, his approval rate is still reasonably high, and he has all chances of passing to parliament if the elections are held nationwide, according to the poll. I think we can discuss it later. But anyway, what is going on in Yerevan is similar to what took place in other cities of Armenia as well. For example, in Vanadzor, they did even worse. They caught an elected mayor, and they are not letting him to effectively run the city. So when this government loses the elections, they are using either manipulations or the brutal force and police.
They resort to harassment and imprisoning people on charges which take forever to resolve, even if eventually they go free.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you if this Public Voice Party is a real party or some kind of a shill for Civil Contract, because they organized in 2023 as a fresh new opposition, and it was supposed to be primarily for the Yerevan elections. They helped civil contract essentially pull a coup and install Hrant Mikaelian with a minority of the votes. And now they use the same tactics to oust the opposition members who are able to block ruling party decisions. So what is their identity?
And again, by the way, this is not the opposition which is connected to the previous government, rather the political group which was once part of the current government. So this is also noteworthy. Now, regarding Vardan Ghukasyan, this guy is changing his political orientation and political identity basically every day. So it's just a political project which he can sell to anyone. And most probably this discussion has lots of finance behind. So I think, in my view, for him, it's a political enterprise which brings him money. And the party is a completely fake party, because it's not only that he does not have an ideology, but he does not have even staff there. Because one day he decides to remove the people, and the next day he has new people, or for some other reason people are leaving the party, then he has other people, but his level of support, his rhetoric, and everything else does not change. So basically, it's just him and some people around him whom he needs he needs amount of people.
Right.
If I could add a little bit more context and background to what Hrant said, this phenomenon of Vardan Ghukasyan's is really interesting from the perspective of how someone can use social media as a platform to jump into politics. In Vardan Ghukasyan's case, it's not use, it's abuse of social media. And it is jumping into Armenian politics completely remotely, from outside of the country, without, him himself running. He's able to control this party. And I say abuse because it's precisely because of lax or non-existent content enforcement by social media companies such as Telegram, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, that he is able to gain notoriety and prominence. You would only need to listen to him for 10 seconds to realize that all of his lives are profanity laden. They are frequently used to dox people. They are frequently used to insult people or threaten people. And people seem to enjoy this. And as sort of a reaction to him, his targets of intimidation, of threats, are somehow confounded, and they change their behavior because of his threats. So he is able to achieve real change in whether it's like a government minister or some kind of a functionary of the government. Through one phone call, he's able to scare them into changing their behavior most of the time. And then the question remains whether his motivations are just, whether his motivations are honest, or it is more simply to either continue gaining fame or to target political opponents. And as a documentation of his meteoric rise, I can tell you that, so he started his career in social media after the war, or shortly before the war, maybe in 2020. Then in the 2021 June elections, he ended up winning 1% of the final vote. But that time they were running under this party called Hypocrisy, which was a defunct party. They just resuscitated it, and along with Vardan Ghukasyan as the number one person on the ticket, and with him remotely, they were able to win 1% of the final vote nationwide. Then in the 2023 elections, which is 2 years later, they created a new party from scratch called Public Voice, which was the name of his YouTube show, or his live, he was going by the name of Public Voice. And they ended up winning 10% of the vote in Yerevan. Although shortly before the vote, they were polling 3% or 3.6% in Yerevan. So a huge difference between the polling percentage and the actual percentage. To me, that indicates some kind of a shyness among the respondents to indicate who they are going to vote for. And just 2 weeks ago, I believe this was right around the time that he renamed his party, but just 2 weeks ago, it was still called Public Voice, and they again polled 3.6%. So he has maintained his polling, and my guess is that whatever he renames his party or creates a new party, as long as his name is attached to that party, he will secure at least 4% of the vote.
I agree with Hovik because in reality, when such a blogger like Vardan Ghukasyan appears, let's say, in Ukraine, in Russia, in US, in Germany, or wherever in the places which have an attention, they are immediately blocked by YouTube or by Facebook, but they let this kind of people thrive in Armenia. So I think this is a big issue because you can disseminate fakes, you can disseminate hate, you can disseminate irresponsible statements and gather support because people want to hear something new, and you can exploit this will of people to hear something new and spread these fake narratives, create fake party, and then become a spoiler of government, and then maybe resell your political influence and so on and so forth. So this kind of politics is very dangerous in my view because it's not only fragmenting political landscape, but it's just destroying it.
Let me just say on behalf of the diaspora that the diasporans also have a right to be videographers and bloggers for Armenia without getting blocked. I mean, Vardan Ghukasyan is a special case. Vardan Ghukasyan is a special case,
no,
but
of course, but it's not about diaspora itself, but it's about the kind of language he uses.
Yeah.
So what he does is extensive hate speech, spread of fakes. This is the issue. It's not the place's issue. You can speak about whatever you want from wherever you want, unless you are, spreading hate or fakes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't going to use this example, but I believe I should now. I will give you 3 seconds. If you're eating something or drinking something, please, I apologize ahead of time. But one example of just a typical example. He told his listeners that if you work in the restaurant industry, if you're a waiter and someone from his targets list comes to your restaurant, for instance, I think the context was Hrant Mikaelian. If he comes to your restaurant, then you should spit in his coffee and take a picture of that. And I will post it on my Facebook page. So he incites the violence, and then he rewards that behavior by publicizing these photos, which, I mean, to me, it's vile. I don't know how that content can remain, and most of it is still sort of available on social media, for anyone to see. That's one example. In the latest example, which was when he commanded his party members to boycott essentially the Yerevan City Council meeting last week, what happened was that two people, of course, didn't obey his command, and he ahead of time warned, and afterwards he basically doxed those people. He posted their address and their phone numbers. He reminded those people that they have mothers and they have children and they have daughters, and those daughters and those mothers are now legitimate targets for his profanity. So that's Vardan Ghukasyan.
Yeah, Hovik, let's not minimize the possibility of administrative pressure that was applied on these people as well. Not to justify the doxing or anything one bit, but it looks like those people may have voted under pressure to go with the ruling party.
Of course.
So in all this crazy city dysfunction, Haik Marutyan and Mair Hayastan leader Hrant Mikaelian have been calling to hold fresh Yerevan elections. Hrant, do you think that there is a realistic expectation under the current circumstances for something like this? And what options are there to achieve a democratic city council for Yerevan?
Well, actually, I think we should not expect any snap elections, at least in foreseeing future, because now, if we imply that at, let's say, half a year ago, it was a big trouble for authorities to pass their candidate as a mayor, now it will be almost impossible. It's not only that approval rate has declined even since then, but also they pulled themselves into the same story as Hrant Mikaelian 10 years ago. So they are increasing the transport costs since September, but the project is already presented. So basically, If we look at how effectively will grow the cost of the transport, it will grow almost twofold. So it will almost double the price. I don't think it's that big deal in terms of economic efficiency because, yeah, the government spent some money on aiding the public transport system, but still it's completely unpopular decision, and government does not seem to deliver significant improvement to the transport system so that they demand the increased fee.
You know, one thing I want to mention, Hrant, is that they also increased the parking fees for Yerevan city center. And one of the points they want to make is that they want to reduce congestion, so people should take public transport. And now public transport is becoming much more expensive.
Right.
They recently announced that they're going to shelve that proposal, but probably they will bring it back again.
Yeah, I think it's been postponed, basically.
Yeah, so basically now their popularity level should have decreased, not only nationwide, but specifically in Yerevan as well. And that's not only a thing you can observe by the opinion polls or the anecdotal evidence, but also based on unpopular measures that they are taking. And again, I don't think they are always wrong, these decisions, but definitely they are unpopular.
One of the biggest arguments of the supporters of the Pashinyan regime is at least that we don't have the corruption of the Nakhkins. This was always a very subjective argument, at least to me, but recent bombshell allegations about political campaign contributions has been called unprecedented even by Western watchdogs. A report released by Infocom talks about millions of drams being donated to civil contracts campaign involving Tigran Armenian ahead of the 2023 elections in Yerevan. The party in total was able to raise over $1.25 million, which is over 500 million dram, allegedly from common Yerevan residents. Civil Contract initially fought back against requests to release the names of the donors. And when it finally did, of course, after losing the court battle to stop that from coming up, Infocom was able to track down many of the donors, each of whom are reported to have donated millions of drams, generally the maximum allowed, which is 2.5 million drams per person. This is in a country where the average monthly salary is 250,000 drams per month. So about a year's worth of salary was donated on average by common Yerevan residents. So when Infocom asked these people directly, many of them denied making donations, or they recalled incidents when they were asked to sign bank slips indicating that they were making cash donations to civil contract. Or some, made some phone calls and later confirmed, yeah, that's my savings and I donated to civil contract. So what? Many of the alleged donors lived in the same building or neighborhood or worked at the same company. Just to sum it up, it appears that certain people convinced their neighbors or coworkers to falsely sign paperwork that the cash was being donated to civil contract was being done by them. Hrant, what is your assessment of this scandal and revelation?
Well, let's say it's not the first scandal regarding the financing of civil contract and authority-related funds. We can remember 2018 when there was extensive donation campaign to the civil contract fund regarding the parliamentary elections of 2018. And then we can remember the case of City of Smile Foundation, where different opponents of political authorities were putting their money, and we have observed several cases when they have made a donation to this fund and then they have stopped being persecuted. So we can call this corruption, I think, as well. Then we have observed several cases, major cases of contrabanda towards Russia. And then lately we have observed lots of drug contrabanda cases, including several cases with 1 or more tons of drugs passing through Armenia or directed to Armenia or coming, let's say we can remember the Rome airport, the Russian border, the one case where they found lots of drugs in Armenia as well. And, drugs dissemination is always connected to corruption. So these are just some of the cases which indicate that we have a systemic issue of corruption, which is, let's say, as of now, it's less spread than previously on the lower grade, on the lower levels of government bureaucracy. But I'm afraid it's not less spread in the higher tiers of bureaucracy. And also some of the corrupt practices have been replaced by other. Previously, some representatives of bureaucracy would get informal payments, money directly in cash. And now they are getting these payments officially. But let's say if you are getting extra money every 1 or 2 months, so effectively doubling your salary compared to what is reserved by the law, you can assume this is also bribing, although it is transparent bribing, but it's still bribing. And then we have lots of other cases which are also regarding the property redistribution since 2018. So I cannot say that we got rid of corruption. So at some point, the government procurement have become, after the so-called revolution in 2018, the government procurement became more transparent. We have seen a lot of improvement there. But right now, we see that most of the procurement cases are made from one seller or one contractor, and they became again less transparent. So we have observed lots of corruption-related cases lately, and I think unfortunately this is a major trend. So I don't think we made any significant improvement if we exclude the case of lower grades of bureaucracy.
So one more episode that I would like to mention related to these shadow donations. If you remember, during the 2018 coup, when the Dukhovs or the Velvets came to power, immediately after that, their first target was the Yerevan Avagani. And Lena Nazaryan, who was a parliamentarian at the time, tore herself up trying to uncover who had made donations to this entity called the Yerevan Foundation, which was set up by the Yerevan Avagani, and it was essentially the fundraising arm for the Yerevan Council. And even for donations such as 100,000 dram, it was a huge scandal. Basically, they applied pressure against Hrant Mikaelian. They applied pressure against the Yerevan Avagani to disclose who the donors to the foundation were and to resign. And after Hrant Mikaelian said that he would not resign, the National Security Service opened a criminal case, raided the Yerevan Foundation, confiscated all of their records and all their paperwork. Now it's 5 years after that, and not a single news about that criminal case, not a single news about what was wrong with those donations other than the names being anonymous. But what happened was that after the pressure by the National Security Service, the Yerevan Avagani failed to meet twice, failed to ensure quorum twice. Apparently, some of the members were also pressured, but that's an assumption on my part. And what happened then is that triggered new elections. And to close the loop, here comes Hyk Marutian, who then ran a very filthy campaign using vile language such as, blacks versus white. It was very divisive. And that's how Hyk Marutian came to power, and he's now a favorite target of Nikol Pashinyan, it appears. And one more thing, immediately after the Yerevan City Council elections were won by civil contract, Lena Nazaryan dropped her efforts to reform the laws to make these kinds of donations more transparent. Very interesting, or very Orwellian, to put it another way.
Yeah, good case to continue the corruption topic.
Okay, we can always talk about corruption, and we should, but let's focus on other areas that happened this week, other news. Of course,
speaking of corruption, let's turn our attention to Azerbaijan.
Indeed. Speaking of corruption, let's turn our attention to the epicenter of corruption in the region, which is the dictatorship in Baku. In Azerbaijan, presidential, quote, elections, unquote, were scheduled for October of 2025. But 3 months ago, Aliyev decided to pull that date back to last week. The elections took place on February 7th. Elections are always a farce in Azerbaijan, and this time was no different. It was roundly slammed by observing international agencies. The two main opposition parties boycotted the elections. For months now, Aliyev has been jailing journalists, opposition members, activists, and even international observers. As a result, he secured more than 92% of the vote based on the so-called initial results that we have. And why go to the trouble, though? Hasn't Aliyev been following the news in Yerevan, where you can get only 9% of the and not win a majority and still be able to form a majority government somehow through magic. So, Hrant, what was the reason that Aliyev chose to hold snap elections now versus October 2025? That, I think, is the most critical question to ask about this farce of an election.
Well, this is an important issue because that's already third in a row snap election held in Azerbaijan. And let's remember the previous two cases. One was in 2018. So elections had to be held in October 2018, but then Aliyev decided to pass them in April 2018. That was because there was a period of power transit in Armenia during the constitutional reform from president to prime minister. So the period of transition was in Armenia between 9 and 17th of April 2018. And Aliyev had his election on April 11. And that's the only factor which caused this decision. So it was connected to, let's say, Armenian case. Now, the second time was 2020. The parliamentary election normally should have taken place in November 2020, but in October or November 2019, Aliyev declared that he's going to have this election in February 2020, so 9 months before the real date. And the reason for that was that in September to November, there was an Azerbaijani aggression against Artsakh. And so he wanted to separate these two events, these two major political and institutional effort requiring events. And so I think this was also directly connected to Armenian case. Now, this time, again, he's passing the elections, which should have taken place in 2025 to 2024. And of course, it has some internal meaning as well when Aliyev declares that, when you move the election ahead of the time, the opposition has less time to be prepared. But, when the major opposition is a pro-Aliyev person who took just 2.2% of votes officially, you see how it is fake. And also, the whole counting process was fake. For example, in occupied territories of Artsakh, the whole Artsakh, where barely 2,000 residents are and maybe 20,000 of military representatives are currently, but there have been not less than 150,000 of votes which Aliyev got from these territories. For example, in Zangilan-Kubatli electoral district, he got some 50,000 votes where there is no local population there at all. So the election was fake completely. It's not that they added votes to Aliyev, it's just complete fake. They did not count. And we can see this you can see that most of the numbers are round numbers. So it's, let's say, 49% or 49.5% or something like that, or maybe 92%, but you don't see the gradient of numbers, which you see usually when the numbers are normally distributed. Anyway, the elections are fake. But having snap elections has proven a track record of events connected to Armenia. So, unfortunately, I'm expecting this election also to be connected to Aliyev's future aggressive plans, which are the following. If at some point Aliyev will see the possibility or opportunity of attacking Armenia without any consequences, including Armenian weakness or the busyness of international community, or maybe American elections, which will draw the attention of American political system towards internal affairs, or maybe Russia-Ukraine events, and so on and so forth. At that time, Aliyev might decide to take a chance and attack Armenia. And there are more and more evidence of that because right after the elections, Aliyev restarted his military rhetorics and showed up on some military training and so on and so forth.
Yeah, he's been posing with his drone people, the Bayraktars and things like that.
Military uniform.
So since his so-called election, Aliyev was congratulated by the EU's Charles Michel for a victory that the OSCE slammed as, quote, neither free nor fair, unquote. Let me re-emphasize this. We're talking about the European Union's co-president congratulating the so-called election of a dictator whose election was slammed by the Organization of Security and Cooperation of Europe. What could be more hypocritical here? Michel also said that he hoped that Aliyev would return to Western-sponsored talks with Armenia. Meanwhile, Russia has further insisted that Armenia must agree to come to talks in Moscow. So it looks like both the West and Russia are turning up the pressure on Armenia and Azerbaijan to get back to talks, and each side is demanding that they broker the deal. Why, Hrant?
Yeah, right. We have heard both from Charles Michel and Putin. Congratulations to Aliyev. And both have mentioned the negotiation process and so-called peace treaty with Armenia. So basically, that's what they say. They are expecting the further agreement or further capitulation of Armenia and want to be brokers of the deal. Because in reality, both Russia and EU, represented by Charles Michel, took participation in ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And now they want to have gains because yet only Azerbaijan got gains. They gained territory and they removed Armenian population. But now the negotiators or the mediators, if we can call them this way, they want to have their own gains as well. And the only one is to be left. So Yerevan clearly wants to have a negotiation on the Brussels track, while Baku is okay with either track, but in reality does not want neither, because the issues which Baku is setting for themselves cannot be resolved with just negotiation, because they want extraterritorial corridors through Armenia, they want some new territorial gains, and so on and so forth. So these issues cannot be resolved just by the peace treaty. So in reality, Baku wants a new war. Now, regarding Russia and Brussels, I don't think they will be able to push Baku into a new negotiation track, although Russia has blinded their eye to ethnic cleansing in Artsakh in exchange of Azerbaijani, let's say, positive neutrality towards Russian diplomatic efforts. So at least I think Baku will continue blocking the Brussels track because of Russian so-called peacekeepers' non-interference in Karabakh and ethnic cleansing 5 months ago. So as of now, I don't see how any of these negotiation tracks can be revitalized.
That's interesting, Hrant, and I tend to agree with you that more and more Azerbaijan is putting more ridiculous conditions and definitely not showing an attitude of peace. It is publicly talking down to Armenians in general and Pashinyan. It is putting one condition after another. So how do you explain the fact that we appear to be so far from peace, but at the same time, the Russians and the Europeans and the West essentially are fighting with each other over where this far-fetched peace deal might be signed?
Yeah, as of now, it's only Baku who held the keys of negotiation process and of overall war and peace issue in the Caucasus, because Armenia under Pashinyan has completely left its security potential, has weakened right now, and does not have any own terms of negotiations. And so it's Baku who can set the terms for the negotiation process. So that's why everyone is trying to please Baku, not Yerevan. That's obvious.
Okay, let's turn our attention to Georgia since we're making the rounds of the South Caucasus here. On January 26, Pashinyan was in Tbilisi and met with Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili. The two signed a strategic partnership between the two countries, which apparently encompasses a dozen areas but leaves out defense cooperation. We have not seen this document, and a Georgian expert we just talked to, David Darchiashvili, thinks that perhaps at this point in time it's a statement of intent and goodwill more than a fleshed out agreement. So what does this strategic partnership mean for the two countries, and what tangible benefits can be expected from it, Hrant?
Well, in reality, possible areas of cooperation could include lots of dimensions, starting from economy, and then culture, education, but also security, also energy, and many other areas. Unfortunately, Armenia and Georgia were not very successful in deep cooperation efforts during the last 30 years. Yeah, there were some positive trends as well, but now maybe given that Georgia already has some agreements with Azerbaijan, including military agreements with Azerbaijan and Turkey, now Armenia has to keep up. And I think Armenia cannot ignore these developments. So it is important to continue this way. But also it's interesting that almost immediately after the meeting with Pashinyan, the Georgian Prime Minister has resigned.
In fact, I was going to ask if you have any thoughts about that, or could the issues be related at all?
Well, there were some rumors in Georgia regarding that, but there is no clear information on that. So I would not like to speculate on that.
Do you think the defense cooperation was left out because of Georgia's orientation towards NATO and Armenia's so-called or titular orientation towards the CSTO?
It is possible, but even more likely it is that Turkish and Azerbaijani military influence in Georgia would anyway block any efforts of military cooperation with Armenia.
So last week, MPG, partnering with Gallup International Association, released new poll results. And as always, we have Hrant Mikaelian, who's our resident sociologist, to help us interpret them. Just a heads up, there were two main categories that we wanted to address. One is related to foreign policy vectors and security cooperation. And the second is Pashinyan's rating. There were a few more questions in the poll, but these were the ones we found interesting. A note on the methodology of the poll. It was done via telephone. 1,101 people over the Republic of Armenia. Error margin is plus or minus 3%. And the poll was conducted between January 23 and January 26, so about 2 weeks ago. The main theme, or one of the main themes that we want to address, is the foreign policy vector and issues related to military supplies or security cooperation. And it's two questions specifically. Both questions show a dramatic drop in Russia's standing, both as a foreign policy vector and as military partner. Going to that foreign policy question, the question was phrased as, in your opinion, to which country or countries should Armenia's integration vector be directed? Responses to this question indicate that Russia, traditionally Armenia's primary geopolitical partner, is listed as number 3. The number one response, 48% of the respondents, was that Armenia should have equal relations between centers of influence. And this is a stark difference from January 2023, when only 29% of the people felt this way. Hrant, thoughts about this response?
Well, we see that, majority wants Armenia to be, let's say, neutral or, let's say, restrained, to not be aligned with any of big blocs. The reason for that is that, on one hand, many Armenians are disappointed in Russia's role, in how the things are going in Russian-Armenian relations. And some are positive about Armenian-French relations, and some are optimistic about Armenian-US relations, but their number is not very high as well. So currently, I think there is overall major disappointment in foreign politics of Armenia right now. So that's why many people want to just avoid, this kind of foreign conflicts, because on one hand, neither of major partners of Armenia showed any clear support in 2020 to 2023, this Azerbaijani aggression period. On the other hand, people clearly see that you cannot combine, as of now, cooperation with the West and Russia in security affairs, and then there are more and more widening security gaps and conflicts between different powers arising. Then there is China-US relations, and then the Middle Eastern new crisis. So basically, Armenians want to avoid importing those conflicting narratives and conflicting, security areas to this region. So this is the main explanation for that, I think.
Interesting, and I think that's maybe a reasonable response. From one perspective, it sounds like the policy of Vardan Ghukasyan back during their time, when they said, we're going to pursue a complementary foreign policy, and Serge Sarkisyan's foreign policy was and. But given the current context, I'm wondering if there is more to this question. For instance, if we take this logic to the extreme, Does this mean that Armenia must pursue, most people think that Armenia must pursue strict neutrality, and this idea that whose proponent is Armen Grigoryan, that Armenia should not participate in regional unions, geopolitical unions. I believe the allusion is to the CSTO. But the elephant in the room, of course, is the Russian military base in Armenia. Could this sentiment also apply to the Russian presence in Armenia in a bidirectional format, not in a union format? The other thing that I would like to know is, is the tail wagging the dog here in terms of, is the de facto leadership of Armenia through its media publications generating this sentiment, or is this sentiment an objective analysis of the current situation? And lastly, given that Armenia has been severely weakened by war, given the current geopolitical storm where there's actually effectively a war going on between Russia and the West, can Armenia even afford to maintain a neutral stance given what's going on and given its own context, its own weakness?
Well, of course, government policy affects opinions in Armenia, and support towards Russian-Armenian strategic alliance started decreasing, not even during these authorities, but yet under previous government, at least since 2016, when security feeling has started to deteriorate in Armenia because of increased aggressiveness of Azerbaijan and more, let's say, neutral stance towards Armenia and Azerbaijan from Russian side. So that all affected, because many in Armenia previously have believed that Russia will at some point support Armenia. Now, of course, Russia never gave this, official affirmation of these expectations, especially regarding the Karabakh issue. But anyway, these expectations have existed and also fueled by some pro-Russian media. At the same time, pro-Western media have consistently campaigned against Russia and have done that extensively during the last, let's say, 10 years. And that also has affected these perceptions and affected the foreign policy and foreign political narratives and so on and so forth. So it's also affecting the situation. But then we see that Armenian-Russian relations are poisoned and lack strategic vision, lack any clear perspective. So people see that in reality, nevertheless, authorities don't want to develop these relations. But even if they would like, at this point, it's not very viable to rely solely on Russia or, let's say, any other partner, maybe just France or maybe just US or someone else. So at this time, we are not in a position where any major foreign partner could, somehow cover Armenian security issues. So this, so this approach of non-alignment, let's say, getting more and more ground in Armenia. So I think it's more objective than subjective regarding the situation we face right now.
And the other question that I quickly want to cover is, from which countries can military and political aid be obtained? People were free to choose several answers. Last year, this category was dominated by Iran, which was number one. Number two was France, and number three was Russia. This year, Iran and Russia were kicked out from the top three, and France, India, and USA were the first three, and Russia essentially was number 5, I believe.
And incidentally, all the numbers are down.
Yes. And also, there was a question that said there is no such country that can supply weapons to Armenia. And that number also rose from 8.7 to 14.7. Although in June 2023, it was as high as 35.8. So a huge blip, and then it came down to 14.7. What are your thoughts about this question?
Well, we had the issues with security cooperation with Russia last year because Armenia had delayed supply of weapons from Russia. That had two major causes. One was Russia's own issues because of lack of equipment in Ukraine they faced previously. But then there was a subjective issue because of worsened relations. And let's be honest, mostly worsened by Yerevan. Russians didn't want to supply and support Yerevan. So all in all, the level of security cooperation between Armenia and Russia has significantly decreased, also because Yerevan refused to participate in any CSTO events and called back the ambassador or representative of Armenia to organization. So basically, Armenia stopped participating in this organization, although yet did not declare final withdrawal. So at this time, of course, people's expectations from security cooperation with Russia are rather low.
Right.
And at the same time, Armenia, well, now we got these weapons, by the way, but at the same time,
Yes.
Armenia got some weapons from France and India. Of course, not for free, but those supplies were widely promoted, and that's why it is affecting public opinion as well.
The effect of government actions on public perception definitely bears emphasis. If you don't publicize some weapons deliveries but publicize others, then you're affecting the sentiment. Now, let's go on to the next set of questions, which relate to Pashinyan's ratings and sentiments about political parties. There are three questions in this category. One is, how much do you trust Nikol Pashinyan? The second question is related to whether people would like to have early parliamentary elections, snap elections. And number three is, if there were elections next Sunday, which party or alliance would you vote for? And as a summary, Pashinyan's rating has dropped even lower from 33.6% to 29%. There are a growing number of people who want early parliamentary elections, 50.1%. To be precise, and that was really surprising for me. And lastly, civil contract support is at about 16.1%. While it has reduced, it is still above the others in the pack. So, please unpack this for us, Hrant.
Yeah, on one hand, the readiness to vote for civil contract is not high; it's just 16%. But they have no clear competition, and that's why if we remove from calculation any people who have not decided or did not disclosure their favorite party and so on, then the ruling party would get some 49% of votes. So in reality, they are still capable of getting majority. Of course, it depends on how strong the opposition will be, but as of now, the opposition is very weak. So I think as of now, the things did not change much since 2021. But on the other hand, the support towards the ruling party has significantly decreased, but there is lack of opposition right now. Regarding the Pashinyan's approval rate, we have seen that it decreased by 5% in some 2.5 months. So it is a significant decrease. And I think I know the explanation for this. Because Pashinyan's approval rate started decreasing quickly. The first time after the Karabakh War and after the so-called trilateral agreement he signed. And then it was around 38% for a rather long period. And it started decreasing again after the fact that he supported territorial integrity of Azerbaijan in May 2023. So after that, his approval rate started decreasing quickly, and at some point it was as low as 20%. Then he partly recovered to 32%, and even after the war in Karabakh and ethnic cleansing there, his approval rate even increased, although many would blame him for these events. But because of Armenian society was shocked by these events, his approval rate at some point even increased because people were trying to, find a kind of support in supporting or rallying around Pashinyan.
He was still able to divert the blame.
Yeah, the entire ruling party media was blaming Russia at that time, and Aliyev, and everyone except the government. So that's what the narrative was in the media.
Yeah, but that's pro-government media. Many people would blame the government as well, but people were shocked, and I think that shock also somehow improved Pashinyan's approval rates at that time. But now the emotions have decreased, and people started, blaming Pashinyan again. So I think his approval rate is 29 now, and it is really low. And I think he's getting less and less stable because it's lower than when Tigran Avagani got 32.6% in Yerevan elections. So I think he's very big issue with being elected. Although there are rumors of a constitutional referendum being held this year, or maybe snap parliamentary elections, and these discussions also take place in the parliament and in the media. So we don't know yet. Might it take place or no? I think the government does not know either. If they see they are capable of winning, they might hold it, because especially expectations of protests against the constitution and protests against the so-called peace treaty might be painful for the government, and that's why they want to secure the situation before it takes place. But anyway, that's just speculative part, and we don't know exactly. But I think with these approval rates, Pashinyan will have very hard time of being re-elected, especially if he has, a bit more efficient opposition. And by the way, we see that, for example, Haik Marutyan tries to take part in this game as well. But then Pashinyan still has Vardan Ghukasyan, who might still play a spoiler game there.
Yeah. Haik Marutyan has actually announced that if there is any kind of an election for prime minister, he is going to run.
Hrant, how do you explain the appetite for new elections, especially in juxtaposition to other questions on the survey? For instance, how does one explain that all political parties are very unpopular, but at the same time, more than half of the respondents say that they want early parliamentary elections?
Right before 2021 snap parliamentary elections, majority of voters, or let's say 60+%, or maybe 62 or something, wanted these snap parliamentary elections. So they consider that the current political crisis has only one resolution in form of election. And as of 2022 and even 2023, majority of voters thought that currently we don't have political crisis, or at least the current political system is shaped by the elections, which, according to majority, not vast majority, but let's say 50 or 50+%, those elections were still legitimate, and the political system which was formed by that election was still legitimate. And now this legitimacy passes, so people are questioning the political system which was shaped by 2021 elections. They consider that this political system is not relevant anymore, or maybe they consider that they were fooled, because let's face it, Pashinyan came to authority with he won the election with another program. He was insisting that he will support the independence of Artsakh and so on, and now he is calling to change constitution because of Aliyev is pushing him. So Aliyev is demanding to change constitution, and the next day Pashinyan is popping out and saying that we need to change constitution with the very same wordings that otherwise we will have a war and so on. So people consider that this system is less than relevant. Although I want to say that during the period of the opinion polling, the discussions on the constitutional referendum were not as active as now. So I think the issue with legitimacy and with the relevance is even sharper right now than it was just 2 weeks ago.
Okay, let's wrap up here. We're over time. I'd like to ask each of you, as usual, if there's been something on your mind this past week that you would like to talk about. Hovik, what's on your mind to share?
Yes, the EU congratulations to Aliyev. Yes, they criticized the elections, but just like, look at Charles Michel's statement. I never thought I would be as surprised given the low expectations I already had, but here I am. For those who like to put disproportionate hope that the EU or integration with the EU could help Armenia, please take a look at that statement. Please print it and put it anywhere your glance may be directed, on your laptop screen, on your walls, anywhere, in your bathroom. I think the more you look at that statement, the better you'll realize that EU's goals, are clearly specified. They want oil from Baku and nothing else. And nothing you do can change that. I don't mean to glorify and make excuses for other powers. I just want to talk about disproportionate hope. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, Hrant, what's on your mind?
This year was continued to be shocking due to the constitutional discussions, because since Pashinyan is ready to write constitution after dictator Aliyev, this is making the situation obvious that Armenia might turn into a client state of Azerbaijan and Turkey, and this will not even mean a temporary or let's say fake peace, but it will be first act of full destruction of Armenia. So I think this is one of the most dangerous trends and needs to be tracked. So the constitution of Armenia cannot be changed by push from Azerbaijan.
All right. We're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Hrant, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Hrant.
Thank you for having me.
That was our show, recorded on February 11, 2024. We've been talking with Hrant Mikaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He is also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. I'm Asbet Bedrosyan.
And this is Hovik Manoucharian.
Please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.